is Humanity Meets Business, Business Therapy with Christine Salvo. Today, I am so excited to introduce my amazing guest, Michelle E. Dickinson. She's a well-being strategist and passionate mental health advocate. She's also a TEDx speaker and a published author of a memoir entitled Breaking Into My Life. Michelle goes first and sees herself as the bridge that helps people get comfortable with their mental health so that they reach out and get the support they need before they hit a crisis. She makes it okay to not be okay and thrives on making a real difference in the lives of others, especially around her well-being. So Michelle, it is so lovely to have you today. I'm so happy to have you coming all the way from New Jersey. So, I always like to start with, wow, how did this start? Like, you're so passionate about this. You've kind of devoted your life to making a difference for others with regards to mental health. I got to know the story.
Hi, Christine. It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. Oh my goodness. So if you would have found me 5 years ago, I would not be doing this work. That's the irony of the whole story. I spent 19 years in the corporate setting working in regulatory training and regulatory quality. And I was tapped when I was in my corporate job to give a TED Talk and tell the story of my childhood growing up with my mom who had bipolar disorder. And that was like the pivotal point for me that changed everything, because it got me really connected to the power of storytelling and helping people feel less alone and isolated around mental health.
Wow. I'm just thinking like, okay, I'm going from corporate world, like machine, go, produce. And that is typically how we get our feel goods in that specific environment, right? Like the better producer you are, the more you almost shelf your emotions, you're kind of rewarded sometimes too. And not to say anything with corporate is bad, but there is a little bit of that mentality of like, keep going, just keep going.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm curious what it was like to kind of switch gears there and have such a vulnerable talk about growing up with your mother that suffered with some, bipolar disorder, some mental illness.
It was really interesting because it was something that I never really spoke about, like I survived, I was able to get a good job. I was able to move up from being a secretary to being a director. I was really proud of that. And then all of a sudden I happened to tell the story one day at lunch. And then next thing I know, my colleagues nominating me. And I'm like, oh my goodness, now I'm going to stand in front of all of my peers and tell this story that was like dormant within me for so long. But when I did, it was incredible because it showed me how so many people are living in the shadows, living in the darkness, not talking about how mental illness has affected them, whether it's them personally or them caring for someone at home. But it was incredibly challenging because I had to be very raw and very vulnerable in front of the people that I worked with. So, it was not easy, and I would do it again because of the difference that I know it made and the path that it set me down.
Yeah, I'm just imagining this right now. Like, what do you want me to talk about? To who? Why? Oh God. Like, no. I already put this away. This is on a shelf, buried somewhere in the back of my mind. We don't go there. Right.
Yeah.
So I just have to kind of know, and I'm sure my, the listeners are a little like, what was the story about? I think it's a very individual experience growing up that way. And as much as we can kind of throw out buzzwords, it's individualized, right? So what did you end up sharing that you would like to share with our guests today? And what track did it put you on? It really sounds like this was a pivotal moment in your life that you weren't expecting. You didn't necessarily ask for, but once you're here, it's like, okay, let's go.
Exactly. And, for me, it was, let me just tell the story and see what happens, and I told the story about how unpredictable my childhood was. Like when you love someone in your family with mental illness, you're constantly walking on eggshells and you just don't know the person that you're going to encounter when you see them. So there's this chapter on my website called The Doorknob. And it literally was a very stressful moment for me coming home from school and putting my hand on that doorknob because I never knew the mom that I was coming home to. And so I tell that story and, it makes mental health real and it helps people understand it. And so, then I was like, well, what if I took all of the stories of my childhood, I could humanize mental health for the person that doesn't have a relationship to mental health. And so that's what I did when I sat down to write my memoir. Was I want to put these stories in this book that vividly recall those experiences so people can have more empathy and compassion for the person with the diagnosis.
Yes. Oh, you are speaking right to my heart. If I could tell you how many conversations I have in a week, just right here, and because I'm a full-time therapist, a lot of times it's directing that compassion to themselves,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Makes
Like,
sense.
hey, you're not acting this way or feeling like this or doing these things because you really enjoy this. I mean, it's torture for you. And yet, feeling like you don't have control over yourself and watching all these consequences happen around you, and then getting the external consequences from, like you're saying, our loved ones not really knowing how to handle, whew, it just compounds.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It does. It does. I mean, they say that when there's one family member with a mental illness, it affects the entire family. And that was my childhood, like constantly trying to keep peace within, keep some sense of peace within the household, and keep my mom stable, and thinking I had the ability to prevent her from having a breakdown, because I would try to be a good little girl, and all of these things play into it. So yeah, for
So
sure.
I'm curious, when you kind of decided to open this Pandora's box, and I think it's really important to kind of address this right now, because what you're saying right now is it took a lot of courage. It's really hard to face our past, especially when we think we're quote unquote over it, number one.
Mhm.
Number two, when we've had some kind of success, that it kind of is like, okay, I'm okay. See, see,
Yeah.
that didn't really
Look,
impact me.
I'm
I'm
good.
fine.
Yeah.
Um, and then wanting to go there. So when you kind of like took this journey, did you have support yourself? Did you seek some therapy to really kind of process the past, or what was your
Yeah.
journey?
Oh my goodness. I always say to people that if I would have released the book even 5 years earlier, it would have been a very, very different reflection of my past. Like
Hmm.
I had to go through my own healing journey to reach a point where I was at peace with the story, and I found forgiveness for my mother, because my mom was very abusive and emotionally, mentally, physically, and it was very hard to be around her. So much so that as soon as I could get away from her, I did. I ran. So I actually was in therapy. I had a couple of different therapists, but then I also put myself through self-development work
Hmm.
with two organizations, because I knew there was more for me to understand and more healing for me to do before I could ever tell the story of my mom. And I was finally able through that work to find forgiveness and compassion for someone that I always was angry with, because I only saw the impact her illness was having on me. I couldn't step beyond that to try to imagine what life was like for her.
Hmm.
And so I had to do that so that I could come from a place of love and compassion and tell the story in a way, to help people understand mental illness, not create more hate for people with an illness.
Wow. Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to kind of uncover that a little bit. Because often there is a lot of healing that has to happen first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like before you have that really vulnerable, I'm going to be naked in front of all my coworkers events. It's like I need to be straight with me first, because otherwise that could actually tailspin you
Uh-huh.
into a whole nother issue. So
Mm-hmm.
after having all of this process and going through this journey, which it sounds like you were very motivated to do, what have you kind of done since to elevate the conversation about mental health? Like, what's in your heart? How do you do it? What do you want to share?
Yeah, I always looked at mental health as something that someone else had. You know, I was adopted and I thought I'll never deal with mental illness. This is like something that my mom had, whatever. But as a young adult, I started to deal with seasonal depression. Living in New Jersey can be very gray and dark in the fall and the winter months. But I never thought anything of it. And then a few years ago, I was going through a divorce. And I was really having a hard time just trying to figure out life after this experience and how am I going to move forward. And so I found myself depressed and I reached out and I got clinical support. So for the first time, I really was starting to understand what it felt like to deal with depression, to not want to get out of bed, to not enjoy the things that I love to do because I was just so out of it. Um, so those two experiences really, they really gave me two different lenses on mental illness. And I thought, well, what do we need more in the world? And I thought we need more compassion and understanding for mental illness, because it's so easy to look away, step over, or label people. So that was when I was like, I might have received a lot of success in my job, but what I didn't have in my job was the fulfillment of making a difference. So I decided I'm going to create my own company, and I'm going to go, because I have so much experience in the corporate setting. I'm going to go into corporations and I'm going to teach them what do they need to do to be inclusive for people with mental illness? What does it mean to create a culture of compassion and trust and communication and acceptance? And so that's when I started my company, and that's what I've been doing for like the past 2 years.
Wow. That's one of my favorite things, is when we have those insights of, if I can do it here, I can do it over there too.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we have a hard time mapping that over, right? It's like, I'm just good in corporate world. It's like, no, you have a lot of skills and talents that you have learned that now you can use however you want to. Like, nothing in life is wasted. That's one of my favorite things to say. And one of my favorite things to really even tell myself, like, even if things kind of go a little sour or sideways, it's like, nothing is ever wasted. It just depends on what I decide to do with it, how I alchemize this specific experience. So it sounds to me like you've taken everything that you've gone through and you've alchemized it in a way that you are fulfilling your purpose. You are feeling like you're making a difference.
Yeah, it was deeply personal for me when I got diagnosed with depression. I actually was working for a company that was very progressive around inclusion for mental illness. I was part of a leadership team for a mental health employee resource group. I was sharing my book as a way to open up conversations at work. And then I got diagnosed, and I said, well, I have to lead by example. I need to go first. And so I told my boss. And when I told my boss, it was not very it wasn't met with a lot of compassion or understanding. It was basically like, okay, we'll get to work. And if something comes up, let me know. Like, it was very, very cold. And then I'll never forget this, because this is where the fire was lit in my belly. When I went to my performance review and she looked at me and said, you know what? You didn't meet expectations. You just didn't bring your bubbly, upbeat self to work every day. And I was like, wow, this is the problem. If I could just talk to leaders about what not to say, if I could just help leaders understand that you don't evaluate someone on their bubbliness after they've disclosed to you that they are diagnosed with depression. So in a lot of ways, that was the most painful moment, but also that was what ignited the fire within me to do and educate more people around this.
Wow. Yeah, that just kind of shows the gap.
Yeah, it
Right?
does.
Like, hold on a minute. I just told you I'm not quite feeling like myself, and yet the expectation is I need to be myself. Here's the gap. So for our listeners that are in a management position
Yeah.
or some kind of leader in the business world, what are some things that you would kind of say to them in this platform right now? How could you help educate or elevate a manager's perspective on this?
Yeah, actually, it's really great you mentioned that, because that's what I'm focused on now. A lot of people have said to me, we need to help our leaders. And because there's so much trepidation around engaging in a well-being conversation with your direct report. Like, people are so fearful that they're going to overstep, they're going to violate some boundaries. And honestly, the biggest thing that leaders need to do is work on cultivating trust. If you have a trusting rapport with your staff, and you are attuned to shifts in their behavior, there shouldn't be any hesitation to engage and ask them if they're doing okay. If they notice that their behavior is not consistent with what they know them to be, or their performance. we can't manage from a performance perspective someone who's navigating a mental health challenge. It's wrong, and it's not the way to do it, you know. So I say work on cultivating trust. Remember that there's so much value in just listening and checking in on your people and not assuming that someone else is checking on them. And getting curious. If you think that something is off, just getting curious and just saying, hey, I'm here for you. And even going first and saying, last year I dealt with anxiety. Even if you go first and you get a little vulnerable, that's going to create more trust with your team. And I will guarantee you they won't lose respect for you. If anything, you will gain their respect because you're being honest and you're being authentic.
Right. So I think there's a few things you said in there that are just really vital, and it's kind of leading through example, leading through leadership,
Yeah.
recognizing that mental health diagnosis has some specific criteria, but we all go through shifts, right? So I'm thinking for leaders to encourage therapy, right, and to make sure that when people have a therapist, that they're able to make their appointments without punishment or using necessarily kind of their vacation or sick time or some kind of accommodation there where we're normalizing getting help too.
Yeah, absolutely. And leaders have a role in creating psychological safety in their environment. It's so important to create environments that are respectful, that you, even as a leader, are owning your mistakes, and that you are showing that you're engaged in each and every one of your people's experience as an employee. So yeah, absolutely. Modeling good mental health hygiene is something I also talk about. Like, what do you do to take care of you? And are you working around the clock and setting a silent expectation that you want them to work around the clock? So there's so many little things, like little things they could do that really can make a big difference.
I love that you say that. One of my more frequent issues that comes up in therapy is poor work-life balance. And it's like, I'm expecting to be a machine 24/7, then go home and be a machine at home, and then also be the lover and all the nurturer and da 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 da. And I'm not supposed to burn out. I'm not going to break down. And one of my favorite things is like, come on, like what happens to a car if you don't change the oil or put gas in it? Like, it's not going to run. And sometimes these expectations, as you're saying, poor work-life balance in management actually trickles down, right? So if you have an employee that's like, I take my breaks, I leave for lunch, I'm not working overtime, I'm setting these healthy boundaries so that I have good work-life balance, sometimes that can be frowned upon, right? And you can almost be seen as like, a not so cooperative employee. So what would you suggest in those situations?
Honestly, you have to protect you. At the end of the day, if your position gets eliminated tomorrow, they will replace you. If they, I mean, not if your position gets eliminated, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you're replaceable in terms of an employee. Your well-being is not. Like, you have to advocate and create those boundaries for yourself. Only you can do that. So when we start to get lost in the demands of our job and we start compromising and cutting corners around our health, we are never going to be able to show up the way we want to in our family lives and our home lives, nor are we going to be able to perform the way that they expect us to, or the way that we know that we can. So we have to make ourselves a priority. And so sometimes it means taking a good hard look in the mirror and saying, is this company, with their values and their expectations, is this a fit for my health and my well-being? Sometimes those are hard conversations to have with yourself, but it's quality of life and balance and feeling good about day-to-day experiences are equally as important.
Yeah, it's almost funny that we have to be told these things, but I'm sure there's people listening that are like, what?
Yeah.
What do you mean? I'm allowed to, take care of myself, even though the demands of this and that and the other. And I do agree that these are conversations that really do need to be had. So I'm really curious, over the last year or so, what have you kind of noticed since, our whole world has kind of gone through this crazy time? Mental health issues are actually on the rise. Suicide is at an all-time high. These aren't things that can be swept under the rug, and they can actually be life-threatening.
Yeah.
So, bringing attention to this is, if we knew someone was actively, drinking and driving, we'd probably have an intervention. But because mental illness, you can't see on someone's face, their body, it's not necessarily a deliberate behavior. There's very few ways to kind of pick up on this.
Right.
So what do you suggest for your leaders or even other employees, coworkers? How can they become more attuned to this and at least, have a tad bit more of that sensitivity, or, as you said, compassion?
Yeah. I mean, and this is a great question. And honestly, this is exactly my sweet spot, because I will tell you that the employers, the organizations that I've been really privileged to work with are the ones that know now is the time to show up for their people. Now is the time to care for them. They're struggling. The magnitude of loss, whether it's loss of income, loss of life, loss of routine, loss of things that you love to do, loss of travel, whatever the loss is, we've all experienced some kind of loss, and it's affecting us. If you look at the data, it says 42% of the global workforce has experienced a decline since the beginning of the pandemic. So if you do the math, you have to look in your team and know that your people are affected. So the thing that I've been doing to help leaders, because listen, let's face it, a lot of organizations, they provide good health benefits, they provide mental health care, they provide an employee assistance line. But the biggest barrier for them accessing that care is the trepidation around reaching out. They're fearful, they're embarrassed. When I say fearful, they don't know what they're going to get. Treatment is scary. Who knows what that looks like? They're embarrassed. They don't want their employer to know. They don't want anyone around them to know because of the stigma. And those two things prevent people from reaching out and getting support. So the work that they've asked me to do is build resilience. Well, I'm helping build resilience, but the first step is getting people comfortable with brain health so they know when it's time to reach out and get support and they don't ignore it. And that's the biggest thing. The biggest gift that an employer can do for their people is make sure they're comfortable and they have a healthy conversation around brain health, and they don't have any barrier between getting the care that they're already paying for and providing.
Yes, that's such a great point. You're so right. It's like the EAP is here, this is there, that's there, but are we really using it? Are we using the resources? Are we tapping into what is there? And also, just in case people aren't really familiar with this term brain health, can you explain that a little more?
I mean, we say brain health because we want to help people relate to the brain as just another organ in the body, right? Like if we talk about liver health or heart health or lung health, I mean, it doesn't have any charge with it. So when we talk about mental, it has like this negative connotation. So let's just talk about it as an organ. It's just your brain. And sometimes your brain needs help, it needs a little extra support, kind of like your heart. Maybe you need extra support for your heart. You get what you need for the other organs of your body. Why not do it for the brain?
I love that. Yeah, I love that. So recognizing that, again, it's not personal, it's not something you're doing, but we all do need support sometimes. And sharing that story about your seasonal affective disorder as well is really, really powerful and impactful, because here you are, it's like, oh my God, I'm on this healing journey and I wrote this book and I'm doing all these things, and now it's happening to me, like I must be doing something wrong, right? And that can often be something we go through as well, of like, oh no.
Well, I think
I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and it's not supposed to happen to me. But recognizing that it's not something that's happening to you, it's things that we go through. There are natural processes and cycles, and there are external things like death, divorce, moving, job loss, as you said, that will totally spiral us into emotional places that we've never been before.
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
sometimes it's a chemical storm, and sometimes it's a combination of the biopsychosocial. Like there's so much going on there. And the destigmatization is so powerful because before it seemed like it was just the one way. There must be something wrong with you instead
Right.
of you must be human.
Right.
And
Right.
humans fluctuate and life is difficult at times, and we all could use some more support.
What if we related to mental health as a continuum of well-being instead of you are mentally well or you are mentally sick?
Yeah.
Like if we simply made the change and said it's just a continuum, and some days you're going to be higher up on the continuum and some days you're going to be lower. It's not a matter of you have a label of mentally sick or mentally well, right? Because in reality life comes along and you know what, you're challenged. So we're complex human beings having a very interesting experience called life. So let's stop labeling it as mentally well or mentally sick, you know?
I love that. I love that so much. And I really, really admire the work that you're doing and the courage that it really took to kind of take this one path that you were on and just excelling at, and really having that own inventory gut check that you did and said, I think I could be doing this somewhere else and making a difference that would matter to me more. I'm always in awe of people that make those changes and do the work and take that challenge, because that takes a lot of courage. That's not usually an easy decision to make, and there's a lot of risk involved. So
Thank
bravo to
you.
you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So this has been a great conversation today, and I love the work that you're doing. For our listeners, if they want to know any more, if they want to find you, how could they do that?
Sure. You could follow me on Instagram, which is at Michelle Dickinson 71. My well-being in the workplace website is careforyourpeople.com, and my personal website is michelledickinson.com. You can follow me and all of my mental health stories. I host a series called Michelle's Conversations That Matter to really elevate storytelling of people with lived experience, and that you can find on YouTube, and just you'll look up Michelle's Conversations That Matter.
Wow, lots of resources here. That is really cool. I will definitely be checking some of those out myself for sure. So lovely to have you, Michelle. And I just can't wait to hear what you do next and how you really kind of transform the workplace into a place that's really safe for people, and that we're shining a light on this issue that's not going away. It's not going away. And in fact,
no.
The more we treat it and the more we're comfortable with it, like you said, if it was a heart attack, there's no stigma around it. Like, hey, okay, you're dieting, you're exercising, you're doing these different things because there's a problem, and we support that, and just kind of wrapping this around in that too. So what a wonderful topic today. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Christina. It's been nice.
Awesome. This has been Humanity Meets Business, Business Therapy with Christine Salvo, licensed marriage and family therapist, advanced certified mediator, and hypnotherapist. Thank you so much and have a great day. Good morning. This is Humanity Meets Business, Business Therapy with Christine